Hello, and welcome to the Future of Innovation in Rare Neurological Diseases. I'm Gina Constantakopoulos, Senior Director of Partner Engagement here at Matter. And Matter's a healthcare technology incubator and innovation hub with a mission to accelerate the pace of change of healthcare, with a core belief that collaboration between entrepreneurs and industry leaders is really the best way to develop healthcare solutions. Since 2015, we've incubated more than 1,000 startups and companies that range from very early stage to sophisticated companies with hundreds of employees. Collectively, these startups have raised more than $5 billion to fuel their growth. We also work with large organizations such as health systems, life sciences companies, and payers to help them innovate more effectively. In addition to providing insights and training, we run accelerators on behalf of large organizations to help them build the right collaborations with the right entrepreneurs. One of these accelerators is the Advancing Brain Health Innovation Challenge, a program run with the support of the Lundbeck U.S. Charitable Fund. The accelerator is calling for solutions that will redefine care for people facing rare neurological diseases by tackling barriers like specialist access, referral systems, patient literacy, and the speed of accurate diagnosis. Today's panel will dive into some of those topics. Every year, millions of people with rare neurological disease struggle to receive timely, accurate diagnosis due to the complexity of these disorders, limited resources, and low public awareness. However, recent medical advancements are paving the way for better diagnostic treatment and pathways. Continued progress can provide quicker answers, improve quality of life, and deliver better patient outcomes. Access to specialized care is also a key challenge, with many patients facing long wait times or needing to travel great distances to see specialists. Innovations like telehealth can help bridge this gap, allowing patients, especially in rural or underserved areas, to consult with specialists remotely. And expanding telehealth options and enhancing referral systems can take more accessible and timely representations. Education for patients and caregivers is another critical area of focus because rare disease often involves really complex terminology, making it hard for patients and their caregivers to navigate their care. These are among some of the challenges that we face. Today, we're excited to host a conversation around both the challenges and opportunities in this space. At the conclusion of the program, my colleague Casey Sheridan will provide an overview of the Restoring Brain Health Innovation Challenge program and how you can participate. So with that, I'd like to take a moment to introduce our panelists for today. Aisha Akhtar is the VP of Health Equity, Education, and Advocacy with the Epilepsy Foundation of Greater Chicago. She's also a master trainer in diversity and cross-cultural awareness. She has over 20 years of experience as a public health advocate in a variety of different settings and is passionate about advancing health equity by empowering communities. Welcome. Next, joining us is Dr. Shaheen Lakhan, an inventive and entrepreneurial physician scientist who's driven to democratize access to high-quality therapeutics in healthcare. He's board certified in neurology and pain medicine with over 20 years of industry experience, and he has successfully advanced novel drugs, medical devices, and digital therapeutics to market. As the Chief Medical and Scientific Officer at Click Therapeutics and a board director at SpineThera, he spearheads AI-enabled clinical development and drug delivery platforms. Welcome.
It's great to be here.
Great. Well,
Thank you.
I think, one of the first things that we want to start off with is, I outlined in our in kind of my opening, there's a lot of challenges out there. Rare neurological diseases is, not just a small thing. It's actually a very large kind of consideration here. So, maybe to start off, I'd love to kind of ask you, what are the most common challenges that are faced in diagnosing rare neurological diseases? What is that current landscape? And I'm going to start with you, Aisha.
Sure. I think that, so first of all, this is a really great panel. I feel like there's so much to dive into, and an hour certainly isn't going to cut it. But one thing that I think really stands out in the rare space in general, just of course we defining rare as 1 in 2,000, the sheer locality of where people live often is not necessarily next to an advanced center, to having access and just not having the literacy of the medical diagnosis. I think that's another really big issue. So I think those are some of the barriers that we can think of, like right off the top of the bat, like just access, lack of knowledge, lack of awareness of like what is exactly a rare disease or not. And I think because rare diseases are so medically complex, their care involves often a comprehensive team that is not always available.
Yeah, I love that. Shaheen, tell us a little from your perspective. What are some of those challenges that are out there?
Yeah, and maybe I'll just start off. I do believe that all challenges are opportunities, and so
Hmm.
we could tackle them. The fun part is for decades now, we in the States and many other nations and regions have invested heavily in the creation of new therapeutics, right? New drugs, biopharmaceuticals, new ways to intervene on the rare diseases. And that's through exclusivity on the market, accelerated pathway, priority review vouchers at the FDA, premium pricing with CMS. Heck, I mean, even NIH funding opportunities, right? For new mechanisms of actions. But what's lagged behind then is we have a flurry of new modalities and methodologies to treat particularly genetic-based rare diseases and conditions, but we don't have the diagnostic capabilities because that's an even more fractionated system. That's our healthcare system and ecosystem, which is trying to care for a sick population for everyone and ubiquitous diseases like diabetes and obesity and heart disease and all of that, right? Now you couple in what you were talking about, 1 in 2,000 or even rare. How do you do that? You almost have a schism in its
Right.
operation. And that's where I'm sure we'll be talking about the solutions. I think technology can be the bridge.
I love kind of pointing that out. And one of the stats we said was 1 in 2,000 is kind of rare neuro, and then ultra rare is 1 in 50,000. And
Yeah.
we're talking about things, some things that people know about, like epilepsy or Huntington's disease, cerebral palsy, and then there's things that people really literally have never heard of, where it's really impacting such a small number of people, but some of those symptoms can be similar across, those different kind of conditions. And sometimes somebody shows up with one thing first and something else second. And so there's not always kind of a uniform expression of those symptoms. Um, you know, how does that really impact timely diagnosis and care? And I'll start with you this time, Shaheen.
Oh, sure, I'll take that. So I happen to be also a practicing neurologist and
Mhm.
could speak to my experience in this realm. Frankly, it is to achieve a diagnosis of a rare disease is by chance, by fluke. It's not by systematic design. And that's largely because you nailed it. There's a spectrum of presentations. We
Mhm.
call it symptoms and signs. Symptoms, the patients, complain or report about them, experience them. Signs, a clinician or some objective way of measuring it presents itself, and you have to be at the right place at the right time and someone who has knowledge that that disease exists for you to get a diagnosis. And that's why you see late in life adult diagnoses of congenital, genetic and rare diseases. And it's not meant to be a harsh criticism that we have a terrible healthcare system. It's just one that right now is prioritizing chronic care management because that's what is really driving a lot of the costs associated with our system. I think that means the bridge is if we start incorporating early detection systems that aren't just relying on your pediatrician or your neonatologist, essentially knowing that those diseases exist because they can't humanly do that. And this group of rare diseases is only growing. We know a finite amount right now. Every day we're making diagnoses of different SNPs and modifications, epigenetic phenotype syndromes that's going on board. So it's humanly impossible to know the whole cadre of diseases. We need to now tap into AI agents that are looking at sensors, wearables, audios, all of this information, plus electronic data, and kind of showing people who are pretty much at risk or high risk or, hey, definitive diagnoses. This person is a little bit outside the normal pathway of a chronic disease, and this is the first manifestation. This is something unusual. Do genomic testing, do imaging testing, do something of that to validate it. Yeah.
Interesting. I'm going to kind of tag on to that. You talked a little bit about knowledge, right? And people knowing that something exists, but also, that also impacts not just our, primary care physicians, but patients themselves. So I'm going to ask this next question to you, Aisha, which is, rare neurological diseases often are complex. They have complex language. They're intricate. They're very intricate, in not just the way that they are diagnosed, but the care plans that come after them. You know, how does that impact some of this kind of identification? How can we better educate, or empower patients and caregivers that might be having a hard time just getting in, and have a lot of barriers to that maybe?
Sure. I love this question. This is my bread and butter as a
Yeah.
public health person. And I think this also speaks to the multiple pathways that people have to get onto the on-ramp of having a diagnosis when they eventually do. Oftentimes they might have their first seizure, and I'm going to speak from the epilepsy lens because that is my work, but they might have a seizure that lands them in the ER, or they had a referral from a PCP. If that, not often do they really have an epileptologist who is a person who's specialized in neurology. Many patients with epilepsy don't even know that that person exists. So I think that there's a lot of places for a lot of opportunities, to use Dr. Shaheen's terminology, a lot of opportunities to create learning opportunities for our patients. And parent foundations are really amazing in that regard. In terms of the rare space, they really have picked up a lot of the weight in terms of really creating a place of community and context for patients. I think that the corner FQHC, those clinics, I think those are places that we really have not targeted, and they can be places where we have to go where people are at. And a lot of times it's going to be at that clinic, at their PCP, and we have to create a better referral system so that there is this information sharing between the generalist and the specialist.
And
I love
maybe
that.
I could add just
Yeah.
a little bit because I love where this is going. And unfortunately, right now, those federally qualified healthcare centers and free clinics, those safety net type of systems, their focus, and rightfully so, is on, hey, I need to deliver clinical care for the high yield topics, right? And secondarily, if at all, is clinical research, data
Yeah,
repository,
right.
interoperability, even on their mind. We should flip the script. Essentially, those are perfect opportunities, right, for data exchanges, and not just data to commoditize and sell somewhere, really for the data, for enriching diagnoses of
Right.
these, early detection of diagnoses, where we could deploy, not where you have the subspecialist neurologist who's a genomic medicine experts, but where technology can actually mediate that gap. Yeah.
For sure.
I before we kind of get into the areas of opportunity, I'd love to just talk a little bit, about, we talked about manifestation, but the gateway for rare disease and where that actually starts. Most people, don't end up their first appointment with a neurologist or a specialist. They kind of take a different pathway. Maybe for those of our kind of listeners who are less familiar with that, what does sometimes that look like? I want to kind of paint a picture of the pathway, and I know
Mm.
saying that the signs and symptoms are different. Certainly there's not just one pathway, but what can that be like? And maybe Shaheen, because of your
Sure.
clinician status, I'll ask you what you kind of some of the ways you've seen that unfold.
Yeah, yeah. Unfortunately, I've seen it takes a multitude of years and
Hmm.
in nodes and sometimes even conflicting diagnoses and management, and failed response to traditional treatment, right, to get to this point. For example, a child could not meet their developmental milestones, right? So they're not necessarily walking at the right age or speaking, based on the normal distribution or standard, curves of development. And then that triggers a series of investigations. And then you look at every organ system. Well, is their heart working? Is their neuromuscular system working? What does their labs look like for their liver and renal function? And once again, years. And now I'm talking about the most captivated audience, which is pediatrics. When you're an
Hmm.
adult, it's even worse. These could just be fainting spells, headaches, dizziness, feeling just sleepy, right? As some of the early or episodic manifestations of a lot of rare diseases that present later on. And then you could see, right? Some people could just say, hey, this is not even a disease. Hey, you're just going through the blues or something of that nature. Other
Yeah.
times they get wrongly diagnosed and put through a pathway of trial and error medication journeys until they reach, or if they even do reach, the right specialist to make the diagnosis. I used to knock down patients that used to go on Dr. Google and
Mhm.
write their symptoms and maybe signs if they could discern them, and then come up with a diagnosis. I think this is another thing we need to flip the switch. Because we
Mm.
have such sophisticated tools with large language processing like ChatGPT, right? These generative AI solutions, which is using the world's universe and knowledge, and actually could be curated just by scientific literature and clinical literature. I think we could have patients in their front seat investigating their symptomology, their journey, and the timeline too. Not just, oh, I'm feeling this now. Hey, but I think 6 months ago,
Mm.
I had a little limp. I wasn't able to walk. Hey, I'm able to do 1 mile in this period of time, but now I can't. And it's going to use all this information and say, hey, guess what? I think you need to be tested for XYZ. You go to your doctor. Hopefully, they're using more advanced systems too, like that, and it all gets done. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that those are great points. And, I think, as you said, something like 40% of rare disease patients are often given at least one misdiagnosis, right? So it creates, certainly a delay, if not, it can, from an emotional standpoint or a patient
Mhm.
perspective, disheartening, right?
Yeah.
Um,
I wanted to just add one thing to that. And when I'm in a public facing situation, I often have when I see that light bulb moment go off for people when they've just learned that there's an epileptologist, I
Mhm.
sort of make that connection for the women, especially in the audience. If you're going to give birth, are you going to go to your GP or are you going to go to your OB-GYN? And of course, everyone's going to go to an OB or midwife, et cetera, down that path. So we should create a system that empowers our patients to be able to seek out the best and the brightest and the most advanced care. And I think today's conversation is about how to reduce that gap and make that quicker.
Well, absolutely. Maybe a follow-on question for you then is, we're seeing innovation in those referral systems, right? In virtual consultations, connecting people from that point A to that point B to that point
Right.
C, that's going to require, because and in the phrase "it takes a village," I think in rare disease, it literally does take a village of people who specialize in different systems. You might need an immunologist, you may need someone who's working as a neurologist, and some of these things have to happen hand in hand or as handoffs. How do you think things like AI or telehealth could help to streamline the process to help get people to that right person, right, a little bit
Mhm.
faster, for them to for it either to be identified, or for them to have the knowledge that there is this kind of wider universe?
Yeah, I think that, AI is, of course, here to stay, and I think it's our responsibility to make sure it's used properly. I think in the Dr. Google way, we can provide better search methodologies. So AI can definitely help us in terms of saving time. So think about that one patient who just was informed that, hey, I think you might need an EEG, you might need a referral. But unfortunately, the bad news is you're 6 months out, you're 8 months out to see a specialist. So what AI can do and what we can help with in televisits is to sort of take a left turn and have a telehealth visit that might be way quicker and at least help provide that diagnosis, maybe send home an ambulatory EEG for someone who might need that at home. There are other alternatives that we just are not really using as sort of diagnostic tools right away. And again, all of this, I want to make a big assumption, assumes that the person has access to, like a smartphone or a reliable internet system at home. I mean, all of this is under a very huge assumption of that as well.
Well, and maybe, not part of the plan conversation, but a question I would ask you too is, you're now asking people to really juggle a huge volume of not just information, but of scheduling
Yeah,
and, personal record management and
right.
sometimes different clinics or health systems. So there is definitely a care burden involved with diagnosis, involved in kind of treatments. Like, how do you see that on kind of the patient side, since that's a lot of your work? How does that manifest when people are trying to just kind of move through this kind of very cumbersome system of things?
Yeah, yeah. It's a tough question
Right.
because a lot of the burden and baggage is actually on the patients. And oftentimes we're talking about diseases that impair their ability to even do that, collect
Yeah.
information, convey the information in some logical order. Like we're requiring them to be coordinators, data managers, their own physicians, their own nurse, their own social worker. It's too much. It's too much. And that's where we got to deliberately develop almost like a combination of public health systems, even social media platforms, right, could be used for healthcare gains, essentially. Consumer-centric electronics and wearables and all these other technologies, we need to start integrating them to reduce that burden. So when the patient is not carrying around, and I don't think they're physically, sometimes they actually are paper records, and imaging and files on CDs and stuff of that nature, but they don't have to because those exist somewhere. It is actually about connecting them and analyzing them and interpreting them appropriately so we can now act on it.
Mhm.
And I think that's where the latest advances are coming. Yeah.
Yeah, I love that. Maybe moving on, so we've talked a little bit about how maybe this can help to, reduce the burden in self-care, better connect you to the right kind of resources. Let's talk a little bit about kind of rural and underserved areas. And, neurology at large, like many other kind of healthcare professions, is, strapped. To put it, lightly. There are not enough providers, there are not enough specialists for the populations that they serve, even in rare disease, right? Which is,
Yeah.
saying something. So, how do we see expanding access to these kinds of folks? What barriers are still there? And, how can we use things? We've talked about telehealth, we've talked about AI. Are there other things out there that you all have encountered? But, what does that look like from a kind of a resource standpoint? And maybe I'll go to you first, Aisha, on this one.
Sure. So yeah, again, the biggest barrier would definitely be the digital equity, of course, in the rural and underserved communities. And then, understanding where are they going for care? Is it their GP? Is it their local health clinic? Is it even a health department? And making sure that we as a more advanced collective society have that balance of information and education there. And then also really kind of understanding the landscape. I think there's cultural issues that we have to really kind of understand. For example, I'm in, of course, in the south side of Chicago, there's certain communities that may not be very quick to call 911 if there was a health emergency or if there was a seizure activity that lended to an emergency. And I think that speaks a lot to the culture. And I think that's something that we have to understand is how do people use healthcare and how are they using it that's in a way that could be serving them better. So yeah, I think that there's a lot to learn, but I think that the biggest piece right now is the digital equity. I think during the pandemic, I kicked around some ideas thinking about how we could bring care to people where they're at. And I think that the local health departments and the counties, I think that's a good place to start. And we talked a little bit about AI and triaging, but what if we had maps on these apps that actually said, okay, you have check the boxes for these things. Of course, not diagnosing people on an app, but like maybe you might want to go to these places. These are probably the low-hanging fruit. This is where we recommend that you might want to start your journey. But I think providing that information up front would be helpful.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting, right? Because it's almost a game of elimination in some
Yeah.
instances, right? Shakeen, I might talk to you about something that you touched on in some of your opening comments, which was like kind of the role of genetic testing, right? And the role of being able to definitively say you have this. And some of that is complicated by not every rare disease has a known biomarker. Not everyone gets that testing early on. That kind of folds into this kind of diagnostic dilemma of as we go through things. But where do you see where do you see technology supplementing that? And not necessarily exclusively in the genetic area, but is it some way that we can do telehealth diagnostics or other things? From a clinician standpoint, where do you see that going?
Yeah, no, I appreciate the question, and maybe as an extension to Aisha's premise for achieving kind of health equity,
Mm-hmm.
it's about like democratizing access, to care and
Uh-huh.
high quality care too, because there's a lot of studies out there. Just because you give access to care, if it's poor quality care, it could be worse than no care alone.
Right.
Frankly, right? Iatrogenic errors, medical errors, and all of that goes along with it. To your point, we currently have the capacity, not saying we have the funding, but we have the capacity to do genomic screening, whole body MRIs for everyone, every single human being in the United States, right? We don't do it because the economics don't play out for it. Plus, we don't do it because we're going to find things that
Mhm.
are going to put you on the pathway of a goose chase. If it's an MRI finding, you find a little nodule or something of that nature, we sometimes call them incidentalomas, right? Is that tumorous? Is that cancerous? Now you're going to have laboratory investigations, maybe a biopsy, and all of these things that go on. So we still practice risk-based medicine, meaning
Mhm.
you have to have some sort of higher than normal elevated risk factor, or the disease is so bad, even if you have a low degree risk, right? We better capture it because it's worth capturing it early on. That's the general principles of medicine. And maybe that's how medical school should be explaining it to students, but they're not currently doing that. Once you identify that, how then are you armed to identify risk? And then the biomarkers come into it.
Mhm.
So, and the biomarkers don't have to always be fancy biochemical lab testing and the imaging
Hmm.
biomarkers and all of that. Sometimes they're behavioral biomarkers too. And there are things that could be easily detected because your Apple Watch detected that you had a little less stride or a little bit, you weren't moving as quickly, or your keyboard detected that you're not typing as fast enough. I'm just giving you ideas, essentially. Or your phone in the background detected you had some vocal biomarkers, and now you're not articulating your speech as well. And so you're on into a neuromuscular condition, an ALS or something of that nature. All of these exist, and they
Mhm.
just need to now be validated as real biomarkers and then looked into in a systematic fashion. And then that will create the high throughput screening that we could then apply if we need to more expensive tests, essentially, to validate the diagnosis.
I think
Yes,
that's
and
fascinating. Oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I just wanted to add, I think what's really king here is the genetic testing piece. Because so many rare diseases are so medically complex, there are so many factors, so many comorbidities that exist with just that primary diagnosis. I think the genetic testing, and by the way, for those that are not familiar, behindtheseizure.com does free genetic panels for children up to age 8, which I feel like should be a requirement in all pediatric visits, up till that age. I think that there's so many opportunities to catch things at that young age and also inform the pharmacology. The treatment options can be just a complete grade above once we have the better genetic panel.
Um, thanks. I think that's a great, call out that there are some things out there that, are low-hanging fruit for people to kind of use for assessment, use to kind of educate. Maybe one of the things I want to touch on, just that, Shaheen had said earlier, and Aisha, when we're talking about, technology divide, I also want to talk about another kind of equity divide, which is financial resources, right? And you mentioned a little bit about incentives being aligned and things like that. You know, maybe just a question is, are there technologies that can help with that? Is there something that you've seen that, people are saying, oh, this platform lets me more agilely navigate my insurance, or, there are solutions that you think could be beneficial for people to help with that kind of financial side of things, where a lot of people struggle in the health system, just from your work with maybe the epilepsy population.
Sure. Well, I think that it's important to mention that every pharma company has a charitable arm, and it's really important to tap into that. And for those who are not able to get into those resources, like, again, I'm speaking from the epilepsy space, like their local epilepsy foundation can help them navigate those spaces. Or a social worker at the hospital can help, or a community health worker can help. But there are resources available, and oftentimes it's just a puzzle piece of just matching the right, company with the right person, with the right drug. So there are resources out there.
Thank you. Maybe one of the things that we'll start to move on is, great. Now you know what you've got. A lot of these are lifelong kinds of conditions that people have to actively manage. So ongoing care is really critical. What are, those digital health solutions like cognitive behavioral therapy, remote monitoring? Shaheen, you talked a little bit about wearables. How do we start to re-envision that ongoing care process as well, so that the burden of living with one of these rare diseases is lessened? And maybe Shaheen, I'll start with you on this one.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I appreciate this. And it, pretty much the entire continuum can be kind of influenced by technology. And even if you have a curative treatment, let's say you have a gene-based, a single point mutation that's responsible for it, and now you applied CRISPR technology and you're back, you did accumulate some disease burden from before and residual symptoms. Oftentimes it's fatigue, it's pain, it's mood disorders, it's whatever disability that has been accumulated up to the point of correction. That's the best scenario when you have a curative situation. Oftentimes we just have things that are maybe disease modifying or just symptomatic type of control. And now how do you address it there? Yeah, like at Click Therapeutics, we actually develop smartphone-based apps that treat diseases. And just like I said, many of these will treat residual parts of your symptoms. So if you have brain fog and cognitive disturbance, you just can't think as clearly or as fast as you can before, believe it or not, we have neuromodulation applications that actually can fix that faulty brain circuit. If you're dealing with the stress and anxiety, sometimes even survivor's guilt of when you get access to therapy, right? Particularly in the oncologic space and rare oncologic diseases. Well, yeah, you have digitized cognitive behavioral therapy, which is available face to face, but virtually unavailable because it's inaccessible. Really, like 1% of the population has access to weekly sessions with a psychotherapist after undergoing, survivorship, essentially. So a lot could be influenced digital solution wise. Then there's disease management as well. Take, for instance, the whole field of diabetes. It used to be where you had to go to an endocrinologist to get treatment. Then we found ways to enable the primary care doctor to manage it. People then had their own glucometers, right, and measurements, and able to dose their own insulin, to the point that we have now closed loop solutions. You have sensors that are on people's arms, right? You see it all the time. CGIs, continuous glucose CGMs, monitors, and then that goes to a pump and delivers the insulin. Soon there will be a day in which a lot of diseases are going to be managed like that. And you wouldn't even have to go to the specialist, maybe for diagnosis purposes, maybe not. And you'll have these almost closed loop delivery systems that are very personalized to that patient. Yeah.
I love kind of the throw in the vision of the future, because I think that's part of, what we want to do here today is to inspire people that are looking to kind of make these advancements realities. But maybe I'll turn to you, Aisha, because I feel like maybe I'll have you bring us from the future back
Yeah.
to present. And just, talk about what are some of those ongoing care challenges, from the perspective of someone who's working with patients day to day. We've talked about kind of pie in the sky, which I think we always need to guide our activity, but like, what are you seeing as things that are impacting this kind of critical care pathway?
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think several hundred years ago when neurology and psychiatry split, I feel like that might have been the biggest disservice to the brain overall, because we're finding so many comorbidities, especially, people with epilepsy. You could say that 90% of people with your common epilepsy, which is 95% of epilepsy, 5% being the rare, have maybe mild to moderate anxiety, depression. So right there, you need to bring in psychotherapy team. And so there's that sort of complex comorbidity situation where you need multiple people. Sometimes people with epilepsy will have dietary therapy. And so then you need to bring in dietitians. So there are so many people that need to be a part of a person's disease management or care team as far as their ongoing day-to-day management of, so that they can have a great quality of life. Because right at the end of the day, we don't necessarily want to increase the years of life without it really improving the health span. So we really want to focus on health span. How can we give our patients the best quality of life? That's not just, okay, take this medicine. If that doesn't work, come back, we'll change meds. Like we want, in the world of epilepsy, again, that's my world, we want ultimate seizure freedom. So how can we get our patients to get there quicker and with the least amount of side effects? So we at the foundation, we really exist as a conduit to people like Dr. Shaheen so that we can help work alongside him and help his patient population with whatever non-medical support that they need. And that's a lot of what we're doing right now, is building the community so that others can see each other in the same space.
I think that's
And
really
maybe
important, right? Yeah.
I was just going to say I totally agree, and it's sad to see one of the biggest wasted times for patients and caregivers that suffer from this. You know what they're doing? They're just trying to coordinate appointments. It's
Yeah.
not even time in front of a doctor or a nutritionist or a
Yeah.
psychologist. It is truly managing appointments,
Right.
cancellations,
Right.
essentially schedules don't work, transportation to such
Transportation.
appointment. It's actually everything around the actual care delivery
Right.
itself. And that is prime. Now, there are certain solutions. There are now these digital care navigators, digital care coordinators. They are doing this behind the scenes. I think that's the lowest hanging fruit right now
Yeah.
to ease the burdens of this patient population.
I love that, the kind of notion that it's not necessarily the genomic sequencing of something ultra rare, but maybe
Yeah.
it's getting a reliable ride, and how we can kind of look to kind of those things that circle the care experience. All right, now, maybe I'll kind of start moving us. We spent a lot of time on challenges and kind of where we are today, but and I think you've been sprinkling visions of the future, but the Advancing Brain Health Innovation Challenge, launched by Matter and the Lundbeck US Charitable Fund, as I mentioned in the opening, is calling for solutions that tackle barriers in rare neurological disease. um, you've mentioned lots of different things, but if what kind of things would you hope to see coming out of a challenge like this, a call for innovation? And I shall start with you.
Well, gosh, I think mandatory genetic testing would be amazing to see that kind of implemented in some way, shape, or form. But I think some sort of app or some sort of technology that does help, like when WebMD first came out, everyone thought that was great. Everyone would go on and suddenly find out that they had cancer of some sort, and then, realize that that's not really what it was. But I feel like if we can, and AI is fueled by what we put into it. So if we can put better information in, so for example, the list of epilepsy centers nationwide, if we can supply that in an AI tool so that it is made readily available. Or these are the places that you should go for XYZ, or these are all the parent foundations, or these are all your social service agencies. If we're giving all of that information up front in an AI app, I think that will help the triage a little bit better. That might be a great start.
All right, guys, you heard that. We have one of two coming up. All right, Shaheen, what about you? What are some of the things that you would like to see solved?
Oh, things to be solved. I think first and foremost, processing the huge amounts of data that already exists
Mhm.
about the patient's experience. I mean, some systems have been around for over a decade, have monitored tens of millions of patients. From pre-diagnosis, right, to diagnosis and their journey. Can those now be put into models? So future patients, you could have propensity scores. This is your risk. This is what you do. Can you create digital twins? Well, if I gave you X treatment, you would have this life expectancy or this quality of life without actually giving you that drug, right? These are all model type of things. Now, it used to be, if we were talking 10 years ago, it'd be collecting the data. Now it's processing and applying that data in a healthy manner. Yeah.
I love that. As we start to kind of wrap up this conversation before I turn it over to my colleague, you know, I'm going to ask you each, what is one actionable step, whether it's something systemic, whether it's a technology tool, whether it's policy related, that people on the line, people who are maybe friends or family of people with neurological disease, what can we do today to start addressing these challenges that our patients face? I'll give you a second because this is a heady question, but maybe I'll start with you, Dr. Shaheen.
Oh, sure. Yeah, yeah. I think make your cause known, essentially. Like so far, there's been a lot of communities that silently suffer.
Mhm.
And, it's the squeaky wheel gets the grease type of thing. Unfortunately, that's how funding works and research and programs. So make yourself, known, make your plight known, but channel that appropriately, right? So you could um, uncover and unlock kind of resources. There are great associations and foundations that you could obviously advocate for. You could now directly participate in community-based participatory research, go on clinicaltrials.gov and support those development programs for new therapeutics and things of that nature. Just don't talk about the problem, be a part of the solution. Yeah.
I love that. And I love the call out that, I think this talks to something earlier too, that the more people of different backgrounds from different places that we can get to participate in some of those trials, that changes things also.
For
All
sure.
right, Aisha, you get
Yeah.
to close us out here.
Ah.
What can we do to be actionable in this space?
Well, I think that if we each individually have decided our own gold standard of care and know where we want to be and start with where we're at, I think, in the public health space, we call that a gap analysis, understanding what are the steps that we need to do to get to where we need to be and identifying what those are. If there are transportation burdens, like there are solutions for that. If it's an education burden, there are solutions for that. If there's a community burden, we have solutions for that. So I think it's just a matter of really identifying where a person wants to be and then where they are and then how to get there in between
I
and
love it.
making the cause known.
I love it. So don't be quiet, participate and figure out your path and where you want to be.
Yes.
Practical, I think, suggestions or influence for kind of the path ahead. Well, with that, thank you both very much for this really, I think, provocative conversation we've had today around kind of opportunities and challenges in the rare neuro space. I'm going to actually ask my colleague Casey Sheridan now to join us. She's going to tell our audience here a little bit more about our accelerator program. Thank you guys for joining us.
Awesome. Thanks, Gina. Thanks for a great conversation, guys. Like Gina said, my name is Casey Sheridan, and I'm going to tell you a little bit about the Advancing Brain Health Innovation Challenge, which we are currently accepting applications for through this upcoming Sunday. So again, you've heard a little bit about this from Gina in the previous conversation, but just to kind of center ourselves, the challenge statement and kind of the thesis of what we're really trying to get at for the 2025 Advancing Brain Health Innovation Challenge is how can we redefine care for people facing rare neurological diseases by addressing and overcoming barriers today. So we're looking for novel solutions for startups that are working on a solution that's answering this question to apply and then participate in the program. This is the high-level timeline of this year's program. So we opened applications in early December. The applications will close out, like I said, this upcoming Sunday, February 2nd at midnight Central Time. We'll then take a couple of weeks to review and select the 5 final participants who will be invited to participate in the 10-week accelerator. Applicants will be notified by Friday, February 13th. We'll then have a couple of weeks to get ready before that accelerator starts on Monday, March 3rd, which will run through Friday, May 2nd. The accelerator itself is fully virtual. Everything will be conducted via Zoom, with the exception of the final showcase, which will take place in person in Chicago on Monday, May 19th. So this details the submission criteria of what we're really kind of looking for from startups. So we are seeking entrepreneurs who are developing a solution that will redefine care for people facing rare neuro diseases by addressing and overcoming the barriers that they are currently facing today. This is a global call for solutions. You do not need to be based in the US in order to apply. We'll accept applicants from all over the globe. We are open to solutions from individuals and teams from across the entire innovation ecosystem. You could be a university researcher, you could be a PhD candidate, a student, an entrepreneur, or an existing startup of all stages. Kind of within that same vein, we are accepting startups. This program is really stage agnostic. You could be early stage all the way up through marketed solutions. If you have something that kind of falls within this thesis, we definitely encourage you to apply. And then lastly, for submission criteria, if your solution does not currently have a use case within rare neurodiseases, you can absolutely still apply as long as there is a potential use case on the horizon on your strategic roadmap that you think that this accelerator would help you advance towards. This is the selection criteria that we will be using to review all of the applicants to get us down to those 5 finalists who will be invited to participate. First and foremost, the ability of the applicant to clearly articulate the challenge statement that is addressed in the challenge description, the quality, feasibility, and scale of the proposed solution or technology, the differentiation of the solution within the competitive landscape, the capability of the participant or team to develop and execute the solution, and the ability of your solution to redefine care for people facing rare neurodiseases. Benefits of participation. So again, 5 startups will be selected to participate in that 10-week accelerator, where you'll receive access to a custom curriculum and mentorship really designed to work with you on your custom needs to help accelerate the growth and development of your startup. So benefits that participants will receive include engaging with other cutting-edge startups that are working within the rare neuro field, networking with peers and other leading influencers throughout the space. You'll receive mentorship from industry leaders and subject matter experts. You'll gain exposure to Matter's vast and broad healthcare innovation ecosystem. You will have the opportunity to pitch your solution to potential investors, health systems, providers, and others. Upon completion of the 10-week program, you'll receive a $10,000 stipend. Each of the graduating participants will also receive a free 6-month Matter membership that will start at the conclusion of the accelerator to continue to work with us on the advancement and development of your business. And then lastly, one participant, after they pitch at the final showcase on May 19th, will also receive a validation study. So you'll be matched with a clinical site within Matter's ecosystem to work on a discrete area to validate that further with the clinical site. Lastly, just a reminder, this is the deadline to apply. So again, that's Sunday, February 2nd by midnight Central. If you have any questions, please email me, Casey Sheridan at casey@matter.health, and we'll be happy to take your questions there. To apply, you can visit our website, matter.health/challenges. It has a page that will take you to the application, and also has more information if you have any further questions. So again, thank you all for joining today. Thank you, Gina, for moderating, and to Aisha and Dr. Lachlan for your participation. And I hope you all have a good rest of your day.